Imagine for a second that your company has just been hit by a massive cyber attack.
Which, honestly, is pretty much a daily reality now.
Right, exactly. And you are desperately trying to negotiate a ransomware demand, or maybe you are just trying to, like, force reboot a frozen, compromised
Yes,
server.
a total nightmare scenario.
It is, only here is the catch. That server isn't sitting in a chilled room down the hall from you.
Oh, definitely not.
No, that piece of hardware is currently flying directly over your head at 17,000 miles per hour, floating in the freezing vacuum of outer space.
Which is just a wild mental image to start with.
Right. Well, welcome to Calm Coding, the weekly cybersecurity podcast covering the latest news and stories. I am so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
If you follow the tech space, you know that the daily flood of news can feel, well, completely overwhelming. Our mission today is to cut through that noise for you, look at the underlying architecture of what is actually happening in the industry, and extract the most vital insights.
And we are tracking a really fascinating thematic arc today that shows how interconnected all this stuff has become.
Yeah, we're starting with the very tangible, kind of messy failures of our terrestrial infrastructure, then looking at how the industry is using AI to patch those holes.
And then ultimately ending up at the absolute bleeding edge of orbital logistics.
Which is my favorite part. But we have to start with the vulnerabilities of the infrastructure we rely on right here on Earth, because it is failing in some spectacular ways.
It really is.
Let's look at the major consumer data breach involving BWH Hotels. So that is the parent company of Best Western. They confirmed a cyber attack that was spotted back on April 22, 2026.
Right, the spring breach.
Yeah, and the attackers managed to siphon off a massive database of customer information. And we are talking about the standard data points, names, email addresses, phone numbers, postal addresses.
Usual suspects, unfortunately.
Exactly. But the attackers also compromised the reservation details. So they pulled reservation numbers, exact dates of stay, and even those, specific custom requests made by guests when they booked.
And see, that is the crucial detail right there, the reservation metadata.
Because the payment info wasn't actually taken, right?
Right. The attackers found a flaw in a web application that housed the guest reservation logs, but the actual financial data, the credit card numbers, banking details, those were kept in a segregated, secure environment so they weren't exposed.
Which sounds like a win, right?
Well, historically, yes. If payment info wasn't stolen, a breach was considered low impact. But that mindset is totally outdated now.
How so?
Because this specific type of stolen data, like the exact dates of your stay or the fact that you requested a ground floor room or a crib for an infant, that is the ultimate ammunition for highly targeted phishing campaigns.
Oh, because the attackers aren't just sending out a million generic spam emails that say, your account is locked. Click here.
Exactly. They can weaponize the context. We call it contextual trust. A threat actor isn't just guessing anymore.
Right.
They can send a WhatsApp message directly to your phone 2 days before your trip that says, hello, this is Best Western Support. We see you have a reservation this coming Tuesday, and we want to confirm your request for a ground floor room.
Wow. Yeah, that is terrifyingly specific.
It is. And then they say, our payment processor is updating. Please click this link to verify your card on file so your room isn't released.
And anyone would click that.
Exactly. BWH's CTO, Bill Ryan, actually issued a stark warning specifically about this. He advised customers to be hyper-vigilant about unexpected texts asking for verification. Because when an attacker has that level of granular, intimate detail about your life, human instinct is just to trust the message.
Yeah, that level of precision on a consumer level is chilling. But when you scale that targeted precision up to the global supply chain, the threat becomes existential.
Oh, absolutely.
And that brings us to the Foxconn breach. Foxconn recently suffered a massive ransomware attack that completely crippled multiple North American factories.
Yeah, this was huge.
We are talking massive manufacturing facilities in Wisconsin, Ohio, Texas, Virginia, and Indiana. So we are moving from stolen hotel reservations to the actual beating heart of the global electronics supply chain.
And the scale of the disruption at Foxconn is basically a textbook example of modern operational technology failures.
Right, because of the nitrogen group.
Yes. The ransomware group known as Nitrogen claimed responsibility, and their intrusion was so deep and so immediate that they actually took down the internal Wi-Fi networks across these massive industrial campuses.
Oh, wow. So they couldn't even communicate internally.
Exactly. Factory managers were forced to fall back on analog methods. They were literally using pen and paper to try and track inventory and manage daily operations.
Pen and paper in a state-of-the-art tech factory? That is insane.
It is. In many cases, the logistical knot was so tight they just had to send the workforce home until the networks could be scrubbed and restored.
But the operational downtime, which I imagine is incredibly expensive, is almost secondary to what actually left the building, right?
Yeah, Nitrogen claims to have exfiltrated a staggering 8 terabytes of confidential data.
8 terabytes. And when we look at what was in those files, it wasn't just internal HR documents or payroll spreadsheets.
No, not at all.
They stole millions of foundational technical files. The data reportedly includes architectural drawings, schematics, internal project documentation, and confidential manufacturing instructions for the biggest tech players on Earth.
The real crown jewels.
Right. We are talking about proprietary files related to Apple, Nvidia, Intel, Google, Dell. Think about it this way. This isn't just robbing a bank for the cash sitting in the vault.
Right.
This is breaking in, completely ignoring the cash, and stealing the architectural blueprints for every other bank in the city.
That is a perfect analogy, because when threat actors possess the literal blueprints of a processor or a proprietary server architecture, they have infinite time to search for vulnerabilities.
Which brings up 0 days, right?
Exactly. In cybersecurity, we talk a lot about zero-day vulnerabilities. These are flaws in software or hardware that the manufacturer is completely unaware of, giving them 0 days to prepare a defense.
So if Nitrogen leaks these foundational schematics on their shaming site, or sells them to state-sponsored actors,
then those groups can map the microscopic pathways of a microchip at their leisure. They can discover hardware-level 0 days that simple software updates just cannot fix.
which creates a terrifying ripple effect. If I'm understanding this right, we're essentially setting the stage for a decade of hardware vulnerabilities.
Pretty much, yeah.
If the very chips powering our servers and phones are compromised at the manufacturing level, then every single layer of security built on top of them is sitting on a cracked foundation.
It really exposes a fundamental breaking point in our current security paradigm. The complexity of the hardware and software we are deploying is scaling exponentially. And the Foxconn and BWH breaches prove that human defenders simply cannot scale to manage this growing tsunami of cyber threats. I mean, you cannot pen and paper your way out of a compromised supply chain.
Obviously not.
And you cannot rely on human security teams to manually audit millions of lines of code or thousands of hardware schematics fast enough. Traditional reactive security postures are just buckling under the sheer volume of attacks.
So the industry realizes that to fight automated machine speed threats, they need automated machine speed defenses.
Precisely.
And the software world is facing the exact same scaling problem, which is why the industry is handing the keys over to AI. That brings us to a major development from OpenAI, a newly revealed project called Daybreak.
Yeah, Daybreak is an incredibly aggressive move to automate software defense. It is OpenAI's direct answer to systems like Anthropic's Mythos and Project Glasswing.
Okay, so how does it actually work?
Well, the underlying architecture relies on something OpenAI calls an agentic harness, specifically utilizing a framework called codex security.
I want to focus on that phrase for a second, agentic harness, because that completely changes the definition of a security tool.
It really does.
In the past, a security tool was basically like a highly advanced spell checker. It scanned your code, put a little red squiggly line under a vulnerability, and then waited.
Waited for a human to fix it.
Exactly. Waited for a human programmer to come along, figure out the problem, write a patch, test it, and deploy it. But Daybreak has agency. It acts autonomously.
Yeah, organizations integrate Daybreak directly into their code repositories. So the central databases where all their software is built and stored.
Okay.
Once it is plugged in, it doesn't just flag problems. It actively seeks out attack paths, analyzes the severity of the vulnerability, and then actually writes the code to patch it. It automates the entire detection, analysis, and response loop.
Which is huge, because human security teams right now are just paralyzed by alert fatigue, right?
Oh, completely. Thousands of automated warnings going off every day, mostly false alarms. Daybreak filters all that noise.
So it prioritizes the real threats.
Yes. High-priority vulnerabilities are analyzed, a patch is generated, and the AI validates that patch in a secure, isolated sandbox environment. to ensure it doesn't break the software all before a human even reviews it.
And OpenAI is deploying a very specific arsenal to make this work. Daybreak isn't just one monolithic brain, right?
Yeah.
It actually includes 3 distinct models to handle different workflows.
Right, there are 3 tiers.
First, you have GPT 5.5, which acts as the base model for general-purpose analysis. Then there's GPT 5.5 with trusted access for cyber, which is customized specifically for defensive security, guarding the perimeter and patching the code as it is written.
Right.
And finally, you have GPT 5.5 Cyber, which is tailored for specialized offensive-style workflows, specifically red teaming and penetration testing.
And that offensive capability is critical. Penetration testing and red teaming are vital practices. That is where a company hires ethical hackers to relentlessly attack their own systems, trying to find the holes before the actual criminals do.
But human red teams are expensive.
Very expensive and slow, and they can only test a fraction of a system at a time. GPT 5.5 Cyber takes that offensive mindset and scales it infinitely.
Wow.
It is constantly attacking its own host system at machine speed, trying to break the code, and then feeding that data back to the defensive model so they can patch it.
So if we think about how software used to be secured, it was like a building inspector who only evaluates a house once it is completely finished and fully painted.
Yeah, walking around with a clipboard.
Right. They walk around looking for cracks in the foundation, and if they find one, you have to tear the whole house down to fix it. But Daybreak is more like an automated drone swarm flying around an active construction site.
That is a great visual.
The moment a carpenter drives a nail at the wrong angle, the drone spots it, calculates the structural weakness, and immediately nails a support bracket into place before the next wall even goes up.
And that is the core strategic difference in this new era of AI defense. It is what the industry calls shifting, left-moving the security apparatus as early into the development pipeline as possible.
So comparing it to the competition.
Well, if we look at Anthropic's approach with Mythos, they have focused heavily on detecting and mitigating massive, high-severity vulnerabilities at scale. OpenAI's Daybreak is attempting to ensure the code is fundamentally secure the moment it is typed.
By delegating the rote work.
Exactly. By delegating the rote work of analyzing vulnerabilities to AI and only surfacing validated, evidence-backed solutions to the human teams, they are creating a defense that actually scales with the threat.
Okay, so handing the keys over to the AI drone swarm sounds like the perfect solution on paper. We automate the defense. But there is a huge but.
There is always a but.
Deploying these massive hyperscale AI models like Daybreak or Mythos creates an entirely new physical bottleneck.
Yes, it does.
It takes an almost unfathomable amount of computing power to run these models autonomously 24/7. Earth is quite literally running out of room, running out of grid power, and running out of fresh water to house and cool these AI data centers.
The physical infrastructure required to sustain the AI arms race is hitting a brick wall. To understand the scale of this terrestrial bottleneck, look at the European Union. By 2030, data centers are projected to consume 4% of the region's entire electricity demand.
4%.
Yeah. That is roughly 108 terawatt-hours of continuous power, which exceeds the entire current annual electricity consumption of a country like the Netherlands.
That is staggering. And it is not just about keeping the lights on. Power availability dictates the actual speed of AI innovation.
How so?
Well, the AI industry operates on incredibly tight model refresh cycles. A new generation of AI models turns over every 12 to 18 months.
Right, it moves so fast.
If you aren't deploying the newest hardware on that schedule, your AI falls behind and you lose the arms race.
Yeah.
But building the facilities to house that hardware takes years. In major terrestrial data hubs like Northern Virginia, developers are currently waiting up to 7 years just to secure grid power connections and building permits.
Right, you cannot sustain an 18-month innovation cycle when your physical construction timeline takes 7 years.
Exactly.
And add to that the environmental toll. These servers generate immense heat. Cooling them requires millions of gallons of fresh water, which is creating severe local water stress in communities that host these facilities.
Which leads to pushback.
Oh, major pushback. Community resistance to massive, power-hungry, water-draining data centers being built in residential or commercial areas is growing fast.
So what is the solution?
Well, as a result, the industry is looking at the only space left with unlimited room and uninterrupted solar power.
Outer space.
Yes, they are preparing to place compute hardware, the actual processors, memory, and storage in low Earth orbit, or LEO. This means deploying data centers at altitudes between 400 and 1,400 kilometers above the surface.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me just pause you right there.
Sure.
You are telling me you want to take our most critical, highly sensitive AI workloads, the systems tasked with defending our global infrastructure, and put them onto satellites floating in the vacuum of space.
I know, it sounds like science fiction.
It sounds like we are just begging for a new era of orbital hackers or literal space pirates. And purely on a logistical level, how on earth, literally, do you beam terabytes of data up to a satellite and back down to the ground without massive, unusable latency? I mean, if I click a button on my computer, it can't take 10 seconds for the space server to respond.
That is a completely fair point. And the latency issue is exactly why we need to define what orbital compute is actually built to do.
Okay, clarify this for me.
The vision is not to put a hyperscale consumer data center in space. You are not going to be streaming 4K video from a satellite, and financial institutions aren't going to run millisecond latency trading algorithms from low Earth orbit.
Because the physics just won't allow it.
Exactly. The latency makes that impossible. Orbital data centers are designed specifically for workloads where the structural advantages of being in space outweigh the delay in transmission.
So what kind of workloads actually make sense to send into orbit?
There are three primary use cases driving this multi-billion-dollar push. The first is batch compute workloads.
Like what?
This is when an AI needs to crunch a massive, complex data set for a week straight, maybe simulating climate models or folding proteins for medical research.
Oh, I see.
The energy required to run that computation is massive, but it really doesn't matter if there is a 3-second delay in transmitting the final answer back to Earth.
Right, because it took a week to process anyway.
Exactly. Second, orbital infrastructure provides sovereign, off-planet storage for extreme tampering resistance. If you have immutable audit logs or critical national security data, putting it in space provides the ultimate physical air gap. You cannot physically break into a server room that is traveling at 17,000 miles per hour.
I mean, space pirates notwithstanding.
Right, assuming no space pirates.
And what is the third use case? Keeping space data in space.
You nailed it. Satellite operators and defense agencies generate terabytes of raw imagery and sensor data in orbit every hour. Currently, they have to beam all that raw data down to Earth to be analyzed by AI, which just clogs up the network.
So process it up there.
Exactly. With orbital compute, the AI sits on the satellite, executes the pre-processing and inference directly in orbit, and only beams down the critical alerts for the final targeting data. It drastically reduces the bandwidth needed.
Okay, the logic definitely makes sense, but the engineering required to actually build this is just mind-boggling. From what I understand, there are 6 critical building blocks required to make a space data center function.
Yeah, let's break those down.
The first is obvious continuous solar power at scale. By utilizing specific orbital paths, like dawn-dusk sun-synchronous orbits, these satellites can maintain near-continuous exposure to the sun.
Completely bypassing the terrestrial power grid.
Right. But harnessing that power brings us to the second and arguably most difficult building block, which is thermal management.
This is the tricky part. The vacuum of space presents a massive cooling problem. On Earth, we use air conditioning or liquid cooling to pull heat away from a server, and that heat dissipates into the air.
But in space.
In a vacuum, there's no air to absorb the heat. You can only cool things through radiation. Furthermore, these satellites experience violent temperature swings. They go from plus 120 degrees Celsius when exposed to the sun, plunging to minus 250 degrees Celsius when they pass into the Earth's shadow, all within a matter of minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, the thermal management systems required to keep delicate silicon processors from melting or freezing are incredibly complex.
Which connects to the third block-resilient modular compute platforms. I mean, you can't just strap a standard server rack to a rocket, right?
Apparently not.
The hardware requires extreme radiation hardening to survive solar flares, immense redundancy protocols, and completely autonomous operation. And we actually already have proof of concept for this.
We do.
Yeah. A recent demonstration successfully tested an H100 class GPU payload in space.
Oh, wow.
And for context for you listening, the H100 is the literal gold standard, incredibly power-hungry chip used to train the most advanced AI models on Earth. Proving that an engine of that caliber can survive and operate in a zero-gravity, high-radiation environment is a massive milestone.
That is incredible. Well, the fourth block revolves around the network. To make orbital data centers useful, they need high-throughput network links.
How do they do that?
This requires deploying advanced optical inter-satellite links, basically using lasers to transmit data between different satellites in the constellation, as well as robust ground gateways to securely receive the encrypted data back on Earth.
Okay, but the fifth block has to be the absolute linchpin. None of this matters without a fundamental shift in the economics of launch costs.
The price tag has always been the barrier.
Right. Historically, putting a single kilogram of payload into space cost anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. Launching a heavy server rack would cost more than the building it sat in on Earth.
But that is changing now.
Drastically. The advent of reusable heavy-lift rockets, specifically platforms like SpaceX's Starship, changes the math entirely. The industry is targeting launch costs of under $100 per kilogram.
That is a crazy drop.
That massive, unprecedented drop in cost is the only thing making orbital compute commercially viable at scale.
And the final block is in-orbit assembly and servicing. You cannot launch a massive data center in one piece.
Right, it would be too big.
Yeah, it requires standardized docking interfaces and robotic arms to autonomously assemble modular server units in the vacuum of space. And as the hardware ages out on that 18-month cycle we talked about,
The space robots have to upgrade it.
exactly. Robotic servicing vehicles will need to fly up, swap out the old processors, and plug in the new ones. It is a monumental undertaking. But as terrestrial constraints continue to tighten around power and water, orbital compute transforms physical limits into architectural opportunities.
It is a wild progression. Let's briefly recap the journey we have taken today. We started by looking at how our systems are cracking here on Earth. From hotel applications leaking granular reservation data, to fuel-targeted phishing, to factory networks going down and forcing global supply chains to fall back on pen and paper.
A mess, basically.
Yeah. We saw how human defenders simply cannot scale to meet this complex threat, leading the software industry to build autonomous AI agents like Daybreak to proactively write and patch our code.
Right.
And finally, we realized that the unfathomable power and water required to run those AI defenses means Earth is basically out of room, forcing us to launch our data centers into low Earth orbit.
It really highlights how solving a software security problem with AI instantly creates a sprawling physical infrastructure problem.
It does.
And as we move our most critical AI workloads and sovereign data into the vacuum of space to bypass those terrestrial limits, we have to consider something. What happens when the first ransomware attack inevitably strikes in orbit? Who do you send to negotiate or reboot a server when your data center is flying overhead at 17,000 miles per hour?
Man, a 17,000 mile per hour ransom negotiation.
Yeah.
That is a genuinely terrifying thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's exploration on Calm Coding. We warmly invite you back for next week's news as we continue to decode the future.